Resistance. This is the podcast where we center women who refuse to be silent. And today is no exception. Today we examine the life of considered one of the most dangerous women in American history. Dangerous to white supremacy, of course. And that will be none other than Ida B. Wells Barnett. That's it. Um, I am Adesoju Iginla, and with me today we have Ida B. Wells. Welcome, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for honoring our call. Let's start from the beginning. You're known as a journalist,
Mhm.
which is one of the reasons why a lot of what you did is recorded, although some of it is lost due to reasons we'll go into later. But that said, being a journalist, could you walk us through what it was like for you growing up, your parents, and your background?
First, thank you so much for the honor of this invitation. During my lifetime, I was honored to travel the breadth and width of this country called the United States of America,
Mm,
speaking on issues that many of us were not aware of, at least not to the extent that we should have been. And I eventually even traveled to England to also shed more light on the plight of the Negro in America and the sin of lynching
mm,
and the impact on our community. I was to attend another conference, a peace conference, after World War I in Paris, France. But as this country has been wont to do, the president of the United States of America at that point, who was Woodrow Wilson, denied my passport
mm.
application and also denied there were 11 of us who had been chosen to go to this peace conference. And we felt it was important to attend so that we could, if we're talking about matters of peace across the world, we could speak about the issues of the Negro in the United States of America and bring worldwide attention to our travails so that if this were truly about world peace, we would be part of that conversation.
Okay.
Well, this was after a long life of shedding light on uneasy truths in America. And so the government denied all of us um, permission, the passports that we needed to travel to this conference. William Trotter decided to go anyway, but he disguised himself as a cook on a ship. And that's how he made it to Paris. And when he got there, he was roundly ignored and not given any kind of platform
For recognition.
um, from which to make our case. I bring that up only because as we talk about my life, and the reason I accepted this invitation tonight is because we keep going through the same cycles, if you will.
Mm,
And what was clear to me, and the reason why I started to write my biography, which I hadn't quite finished when I made my transition, um, was because I had met a young woman 25 years of age. And from her question, I realized she knew nothing about the work that I had done. And for me, it was important that those who have lived the experience tell the stories.
Okay.
And so I bring up this history and I'll come back to the question you asked me, because it's not just about my life as a journalist, my life as what they would now today call an investigative reporter was always about telling the truths that were too often covered over or not addressed at all.
Mm.
And quite often, even we, Negroes as we were called then, were ignorant of what was happening to us. And so when you now hear about Paul Robeson
Okay.
and the group that wanted to go to the United Nations to present, we cry genocide, right?
Yes.
And when you hear about Malcolm X, and when you see so many other iterations of Black people, whether in this country or across the diaspora or in Africa, attempt to bring their issues to the world stage, we understand that we just didn't start doing that today.
Mm.
We have a history, and we should know that history. Having said that, I was born Ida Bell Wells on July 16th, 1862, in a place called Holly Springs, Mississippi.
Old
Always
Miss.
important to pay attention to these dates, because that would mean that I was born into slavery, wouldn't it?
That would be the case. Yes.
My parents were James and Elizabeth Wells, Elizabeth also known as Lizzie. And my father was the product of a rape.
Mm.
A white enslaver raping his Black enslaved mother. My parents were enslaved. I suppose I should call him a man. Spires Bowling. By the way, I will work very hard today as we speak and as I recount years of my life. I will work very hard today to hold back on the one area, character trait, if you will, that some said often got me into trouble. And I saw it in one of my children as well. And that is that in some circles, I was known to have a fiery temper.
Yeah.
But hopefully, amongst friends, there would be no reason
Yeah.
for that to flare up. My father was a skilled carpenter, and my mother was a cook. And I was the first of their children. My mother was known for her discipline and her dignity. She did not suffer fools kindly. My childhood was definitely shaped by Reconstruction,
Mhm.
which, as you may know, and if you don't know, then here's an assignment, because before I really embraced the love of my life in terms of my career, journalism, I was a school teacher.
Mm.
Tell you a little bit about that in a second here. But I watched my father as a young girl, and I saw how he moved. I saw that he was involved in what I would later understand was politics. And he helped found Rust College, a school for nearly freed Black students. Education was sacred in my home. My parents could not read and write at the end of the Civil War, but they sent their children to school and they learned right alongside of us. And we were also taught through everything that we experienced, as much as our parents tried to shield us from the worst of
Society.
racism and the hatred from white people, we learned that freedom was very fragile. I recall my father taking up his right to vote. And at that time, although we had quote unquote been freed, we still lived on the property of our previous enslaver. Many Black people did. They stayed on as sharecroppers. Because where were you to go with this newfound freedom and no land and no food and no tools at the time? And this enslaver forbade my father from voting. And my father, being the race man that he is, and he was, he went and voted anyhow. And upon his return, my father had been locked out of his workshop where he did his carpentry work. And so my father, with the money he had saved, went and bought his own tools and hired himself out to make a living. I recall many evenings when the men and sometimes women would gather in our home, and my father would call on me to read the newspaper. Information was important to us. We needed to understand what was happening in the world around us. It therefore baffles me that today, many generations later, some of you have not had a newspaper cast a shadow on your stoop in years. I know you can get your news from many sources, but even as convenient as it is, many of you don't follow the news of your time. And what that results in is people who are deeply unaware of the issues impacting them and the decisions being made that shape their lives. And if you're ignorant, how do you then effectively plan? How do you build a nation? Newspapers were very important to us in our time. I'm getting ahead of myself. But do you know that after my friend Thomas Moss and two others were killed in Memphis, Tennessee, because they had the gall, the mitigated gall, to open a grocery that served their own people in their own community. And the white owners of the supermarket wanted all that business to come to them, always threatened by our progress. Do you know that when I started to write columns and articles in my paper telling the people of Memphis, the Black people of Memphis, to move out of the town?
Why?
Why?
Yes.
Because of the lynchings.
Oh,
because we could go other places and create a different livelihood for us, because we had no safety, no freedom in that town. The officials had made it very clear. The power of the newspaper, the power of journalists.
mm,
Do you know that in a scant 6 months, over 6,000 Black people, Negroes as we were called then, moved from Memphis, of about 30,000 who at that time lived there.
the power of
That is
information.
significant. It started to impact
The
so
economy.
many of the white businesses, so much so that they came and asked me to stop telling the Negroes to leave. That's the
Mm,
power of journalism. And today, what are we doing? And for those who are writing, who's paying attention? How would you know what is going on? Let me get back to my personal story. But as you can see, there is no Ida B. Wells, Ida B. Wells Barnett, as I would later be known. Can't tell the story of my life without telling the story of the times in which I lived in and what was happening to my people. And I dare say that if you consider yourself of the Negro race or the Black race or the African American race or whatever we're calling ourselves these days, and it is possible for you to tell your life story, and you are this singular being divorced from the lives of your people and the politics of your lifetime, I wonder, perhaps, perhaps you would be like some of the elite Negroes that I came across, and I will share more about them. Nonetheless, in 1878, while I was visiting my grandmother, I again learned through the papers that a yellow fever epidemic had torn through Mississippi. I had to make my way back home as soon as I could. And upon arriving back home, I found out that both my parents had died within days of each other.
mm,
I was 16 years old, the oldest, and my youngest sibling was an infant. And my sister, Evelyn, was paralyzed, needed extra care. Well-meaning relatives suggested that the best thing to do would be to separate us kids, fan us out to various family members. I refused. We had lost our parents. We were not going to lose each other. But what was I to do as a 16-year-old girl? My parents had left us our home and about $300, which was nothing to sneeze at back then,
yeah.
but also not a whole lot. not for an extended period of time with no additional income coming in. But I had been a very bright student. And so I put my hair up in a bun, pulled my dress down, held my carriage upright, and I went about securing a teaching position
Hmm.
and lied about my age just to make sure that I could keep my family intact. 16, Black, female, orphaned in Mississippi.
Oh, miss.
The same Mississippi one of your guests sang about. Mississippi, goddamn.
Yeah.
I understand you call this women and resistance. Perhaps we can trace my resistance all the way back
True.
to
True.
this very unfortunate event in my life. The job that I got as a teacher was 6 miles from home. I would teach all week, take the train and come back home, and then the entire weekend I would spend washing and doing laundry and cooking and cleaning the home and getting things ready for my siblings to be able to last the week without me being physically present because I had to earn a living for us. I would board the first class ladies' car on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad train. Well, it was 1884. Reconstruction was, for all intents and purposes, over. And white people were pushing back with everything they had in them. And here comes a white conductor insisting that I move to the colored car. I rode in the ladies' car because there was a certain decorum. You were not subject to men being loud and gambling and cussing. Were Black women not to be protected and be in genteel circumstances like white women? Was
Yeah.
our virtue any less valuable?
That's all.
The white conductor told me to move to the colored car, and I refused. And so he put his hands on me and attempted to drag me out of my seat. And I put my teeth on him. I bit him. Yes, I did. And so when we got to the next stop, he got reinforcement, and it took 3 of them, battering and bruising me and ripping my clothes to get me off that train. And those white women cheered and clapped.
Wow. Surprise, surprise.
So I sued. I sued the railroad company in a Memphis court,
In 1884.
and I won $500 in damages. How many of you today are so afraid to speak up against injustice to you or anyone else? How many of you just lay down and take whatever is dished out? Well, remember I told you about these Negroes, and I asked If you can tell your story and somehow that story bypasses what was happening to Black people during your time, I'm going to look at you askance. Well, I had a Black lawyer representing me. And then when it came time, I found out that he had been bribed, and it was his goal to intentionally lose the case for me.
Wow. Even back then?
So I actually had to hire a white lawyer to represent me. And I wrote in my diary, I wrote extensively in my diary. I wrote about my disappointment that one of my race would be so easily compromised, when the very thing I was fighting for was not just about me,
For the collective.
although God knows those the damages that they were told to pay would have gone a long way to help me with my family. But it would have helped to push back Jim Crow. No, he was just going to sell me down the river, as too many of our people have sold us down the river before. Like I said, we won in a Memphis court, and then the lawyers for the railroad came back. And they offered to pay me less than what the damages I had won were. And said if I did not accept their offer, they would appeal it to the Tennessee Supreme Court. I felt confident in my case and in the evidence that we were going to provide. And so my white attorney represented me. And the Supreme Court did not look at any of our evidence. In fact, they decided that I had set out to harass the railroad company, and they ruled against me and awarded court fees and attorney fees in excess of $200
Wow.
to the railroad companies that I was told I had to pay. What a reversal of fortunes. Nonetheless,
How much was the initial award to you?
$500 to me.
So it was reversed.
Yes. And I was then required to pay over $200 to the railroad company because the Supreme Court determined, in spite of all the evidence, that I had set out to harass the railroad company. These acts, government-sanctioned acts, are designed to break our spirit, designed to keep us in a place of inferiority, designed to make us believe that we're less than, so that we stop asking for or fighting for anything more than what they decide to mete out. But no matter how many times I got knocked down, it was my goal to always get back up, and I did. Now I know you see me as an old woman, and the gray hair and even the eyebrows have gone gray. It did not always look this way, although it is an honor and a privilege to age.
True.
I was once one of the most courted women in Memphis and beyond.
Hmm.
Oh, I could easily name at least 10 very eligible bachelors who
Sought
were
your
very
hand.
interested in me in many marriage proposals, but I did not have much use at that time for that. And in fact, in my diary, I write about being warned to be more sociable, and I did attempt to do so. But even that got me into some trouble as well. I had a proclivity for nice clothes, and I would often go to uptown to where the nice dress shops were, and the whites frowned at it, and the Negroes did too. It just seemed like I didn't know how to stay in my place. I also loved the theater. I went to see a production of Othello. There's so many others as well. And each time, one time I remember going with Albert. Oh, I had so much fun. And when we were done, I was teaching Sunday school on Sundays at church. But that Saturday night, oh my goodness, we went back to a friend's house, and as your people would say, they're the younger folk today, we partied till the morning. Now, I still went to church, and I still carried out my duties as a Sunday school teacher, but I got a stern talking to, for news traveled rather fast.
So
And
who is Albert? You mentioned Albert.
oh, just one of my suitors at the time.
Oh, okay.
And some of the deacons at the church were rather concerned about my behavior. Here's a young woman with no parents, and perhaps they had heard that I had imbibed, and that's not really a conversation that I am going to get into at this time. But then, nonetheless, they impressed upon me the importance of me conducting myself as a role model for the young people under my
So,
tutelage. And
yeah.
I did make some adjustments, but I did not marry at that time anyway. I began writing even as I was pursuing my career as a teacher.
Mm.
And I wrote under the pen name Iola. Um, I had passed my test to become a school teacher in Memphis, and I had been assigned to the first grade class
Mm.
at the city's all Black Saffron School. Now, my aunt had moved to California, my aunt, and she had asked to take two of my siblings just to help relieve some
Okay.
of the pressure that was on me.
Okay.
And so she took Annie and Lily with her. Um, and then I had Eugenia. Now, Eugenia was my sister who had the paralysis, and so Eugenia, James, and George were living on Bell's farm, and then I was on my own in Memphis, but sending money back home.
Mm.
But getting this job in Memphis, my salary rose to $60 a month.
Wow.
I averaged about 70 pupils in my class. And of course, living in the city was very expensive. And I was sending money not just to my aunt Fanny, who was in California, for to assist with my siblings. I was also sending money to my aunt Belle to also assist with my siblings. And so I had money going out in so many different directions. But it was still exhilarating, finally, to be on my own as a young woman. And I enjoyed, like I said, a very active social
Social
life.
life. Yeah.
Now, my writing would soon gather me some attention. Of course, back in those days, few Black women went into journalism. We were teachers, maybe nursing profession. Of course, we were domestics, but not necessarily journalism. And what I had done is, in coming up with Iola, I was actually writing Ida, but I'd written it so fast that the D looked like two letters, O and L. And that is
Mm.
where Iola actually
Okay.
came
I
from,
mean,
in case you
okay.
were wondering. Now, even then, the few Black female journalists that we had would write on the topics that were considered women's topics. So maybe book reviews or school news or articles about marriage and children. But I wrote about racial issues, which was unheard of. And Iola was likely to criticize white people and also Black people. In one of my first articles, which was titled The Functions of Leadership, this was published in the Living Way on September 12th, in 1885. I complained about these bourgeois Black folk who did nothing to alleviate the poverty and the misery of their own people. In another article, which is titled Iola on Discrimination, I criticized whites for bigotry against Black people, and I criticized Black people for not fighting segregation more, for not having the gumption. Well, some of my criticism was also directed to the leaders of the school where I was employed.
Oh,
That didn't go over so well. But as my articles began to be covered or carried in many other papers across the country, reprinted in places like the Little Rock, Arkansas, the Little Rock Sun in Arkansas, the Bee in Washington, D.C., and the New York Freeman, which was at the time headed by T. Thomas Fortune. He was enthralled with my articles, and he wanted to meet, as he said, the brilliant Iola. And when he finally came to Memphis from Kentucky to see me, he offered me $1 a week to write for the American Baptist. Wow, I could actually get paid doing the work that I loved.
mm.
And as I wrote in my diary, and I will quote, it was the first time anyone had offered to pay me for the work I had enjoyed doing. I had never dreamed of receiving any pay, for I had been too happy over the thought that the papers were giving me space.
Mm.
I know that there is a young woman, there's a young man listening to me right now who is just happy to be in a space, having an opportunity to do what they love. But I want you to dream a little bigger than even I did. that you can actually make a living doing what you love. So I became famous, really, amongst Black newspaper readers. And Thomas Fortune, he said, she has plenty of nerve. She is smart as a steel trap, and she has no sympathy with humbug. But not everybody was a fan. The Cleveland Gazette had this to say about me. She's trying to be pretty as well as smart. Now, how many young women today are feeling like they cannot be themselves because they can either be one or the other? My nickname was Princess of the Press. But there's sacrifices that come with this. And I know we don't have forever, so I will speed this story up. But I wanted to give you an understanding of my beginnings.
Context.
I launched the Free Press. And after my friends were lynched, were murdered, I happened to be out of town speaking when again T. Thomas Fortune met me in New York and said, "You cannot go back to Memphis." And I said, "Why ever not?" And he said, "Have you not seen the headlines of the paper today?" And it was in the paper that I found out that I was considered such a threat that my printing press had been burned down, and they had positioned men to spy on my home, to look for me at all the train stations. And my friends warned that should I return, I would be hanged, I would be shot. There were all of these plans that they had for me. And so I could not return. And there
All
was
for,
nothing to return to.
all for writing.
And so here I was at age 30, single, no job, no printing press. All my money had been sunk into my press and just really the clothes that I had with me. And I had to start again. But start again I did, because what other option should we take in the face of this brutality and this hatred of us? Should we lay down and die?
No, no, we can't cower.
I pause only because it hurts to think about the way my friends were killed. Thomas Moss's wife was pregnant. She stayed on until after she had her baby before she moved. Can you believe that they kill us and then they spread word throughout Memphis for more of them to come out, and their law officers going all through the Black part of town, arresting Black people, quote unquote, on suspicions of being involved in some shooting? they call it a bloody riot when they go and massacre our people. Thomas Moss had begged for his life and for the sake of his wife, his daughter, and his unborn baby. And when he realized they were going to kill him anyway, he said, "Tell my people to go west, for there is no justice for them here." What got them so upset that made them decide to burn down the free speech, my press? Because I wrote an editorial after the murders. And in that editorial, I said this: "The city of Memphis has demonstrated that neither character nor standing avails the Negro if he dares to protect himself against the white man or become his rival. There is nothing we can do about the lynching now, as we are outnumbered and without arms. The white mob could help itself to ammunition, but the order was rigidly enforced against the selling of guns to Negroes. There is therefore only one thing left that we can do: save our money and leave a town which will neither protect our lives and property nor give us a fair trial in the courts, but takes us out and murders us in cold blood when accused by white persons." And the people fled. Some Black people from Memphis settled in Arkansas. Others left the South altogether, going to places like California and Kansas. Betty Moss eventually moved to Indiana. People left by train. Some people walked or traveled in wagons. Crowds came together to watch 300 plus people leaving all at the same time, taking action. And many of the Black people who remained in Memphis refused to work for the white people there. Like I said, within 2 months, 6,000 Black members of Memphis had moved. Meanwhile, prominent white men in Memphis were still hurling threats. "You got off light. We first intended to kill every one of those 31 niggers in jail, but concluded to let all go but the leaders." That lynching caused me to start investigating other lynchings. I found out that that word lynching dates back to the 1700s. Did you know that?
No.
There is almost no part of American history that when you go and research it, does not come back to racism. Lynchings, these were the beatings named after Virginian Charles Lynch, who authorized attacks against British sympathizers. After independence, the lynchings moved from British sympathizers, who could have been Black and white, and primarily it was used against Black people. It meant the murder of a person by a mob, usually by hanging. 1890, 85 of the 96 people lynched were Black. Because they, like I said, they used to lynch white people. And by the year 1892, when I really started to delve into my research, 230 people were known to have been lynched that year.
Wow.
The true figure was probably a lot higher, for many people just disappeared or died in suspicious accidents. This is what some of us did not know. And it's still, this kind of disinformation still carries on today. You get a newspaper,
Okay.
not financed by us, not written by us, and you read a headline and you believe every word in that headline. Well, here's an example of a headline I came across. The big burly brute was lynched because he had raped the 7-year-old daughter of the sheriff. But do you know what the truth was about that situation?
Go on.
The 7-year-old daughter was actually an 18-year-old woman. The burly brute was actually a young black boy, man of the same age, and the two were lovers. She white, he black. The sheriff had found the couple together and concocted the rape story, inciting a mob to kill his daughter's boyfriend. And then the newspapers took it a step further and made the woman a 7-year-old girl. Now, we as Black people could read the same headlines and believe it. This is why we must have our own presses. This is why we must do our own investigations. Because people are actually poisoning you against yourselves. And so you had these elitist Black people who wanted nothing to do with the people they considered the riffraffs,
Less than.
the Black people who were bringing down the race. They felt if they conducted themselves and comported themselves in a certain manner, that would free them. And I would not say that I did not at one point in my life believe the same. In South Carolina, the governor, Benjamin R. Tillman, stood under a tree where 8 Black people had been lynched and boasted, "I would lead a mob to lynch a Negro who had raped a white woman." This was the prevailing, Black men who were raping white women. But they did not want to hear the truth of maybe their women being interested in Black men. Governor John B. Buchanan of Tennessee said, actually refused to send out a militia to protect a Black man who was being dragged through the streets. Today you have ICE. And I understand that there are some of you of what we would consider the Negro race who are applauding the tactics of ICE. Do you not know your history? Do you not know that soon
They will come for you.
Well, I knew my articles had put my life in danger, and I was not stupid. I bought a pistol, and I kept it on me. And later, one of the quotes I'm known for is that I said I believe a Winchester rifle should have a prominent place in every Black home. The free speech was burnt, but I did not stop. In New York, 30 years old with hardly a penny to my name, T. Thomas Fortune gave me a job and invited me actually to become a 1/4 owner of the newspaper, the New York Age, and to write a weekly column. And I did that work I met with, at the time, 75-year-old Frederick Douglass, and he had asked me to visit him because he too had been reading my articles. And he said that my writings on lynchings was actually a revelation to him.
Wow.
Again, when we don't have information, it is easy to fall for disinformation.
Mm.
At his suggestion, well, maybe not his suggestion, but certainly his encouragement, I published a manuscript called Southern Horrors: Lynch Law in All of Its Phases. And to be able to publish it, because of course no publisher was going to touch it, 250 women in New York City decided to hold a fundraising testimonial in my honor. It was October 5th, 1892. And that testimonial was one of the most moving experiences of my life. In the foreword for that book, Frederick Douglass wrote these words: "Brave woman, you have done your people and mine a service which can neither be weighed nor measured. If American conscience were only half alive, a scream of horror, shame, and indignation would rise to heaven wherever your pamphlet shall be read." Well, it appears that American conscience is still not yet half alive, because not only should we be screaming at what is happening to Black men and women unfairly locked up in jails all across the United States of America, Black women pushed out of jobs under this regime, under a felon, but also there should be a scream of horror, shame, and indignation at what ICE is doing. And there should definitely be screams of horror, shame, and indignation at what a man called Jeffrey Epstein and all of his co-conspirators were allowed to do.
And allowed to get away with.
And though many people, men in particular in high places, knew what was going on, they chose to remain silent and now even continue with the cover up. There's so much more that I can share with you, but let me just give you a few highlights. I did go on to marry. I went to the big music world conference, the museum they had in exhibition they had in Chicago. My words escaped me at this time. And of course, the only pavilion there that had anything to do with Black people was the one from Haiti. And the Haitians had asked Frederick Douglass to hold court, as you will,
Mhm.
in their pavilion. And of course, there were all of these white people who wanted to come and shake his hand and spend time and so on with him. I was incensed at the fact that here was an opportunity to showcase what the Negro had done after our emancipation, in spite of the lack of assistance.
Instead.
Um, and so I did write up a manuscript with the help of some other gentlemen, including Ferdinand Barnett. And we printed 10,000 copies and we passed them out. And in working with Ferdinand Barnett, we began to build a close relationship. He was 10 years older than me. I was 33 at the time. And we eventually made the decision to marry. As my grandson would famously say much later, Grandpa had to ask Grandma 3 times for her hand in marriage before she finally agreed to do so. There's so much more I can tell you about my time and work with founding the NAACP, of which I was then not invited to be on the board. And it was W.E.B. Du Bois who left my name off of that board. Because as progressive as he was back then, he was not progressive enough to see women as equals. Well, thank God he did evolve eventually, I believe. I did get married. I had 4 children in quick succession. My husband was so supportive of the work that I did that he actually hired a nurse to travel with me so that even though I was a nursing mother, it did not derail the work that I was doing. And we worked together on a printing press and a newspaper that he had initially founded. I was harassed at different times by the United States government. One time after Black soldiers in Houston, Texas, who had endured so much indignity, had fought back, and the government decided to kill some of them in some trial where they did not really give them a fair shake.
Yep.
And I had decided to honor these men, but no church would allow me to hold a memorial in their honor because they were afraid
The state may
of
come down.
retribution from white mobs and from the government. I think we're seeing that again
Yep.
in these times, people being too afraid to speak up. But speak up, I would continue to do. Like I said, when the United States and its allies won the war in November of 1918, and we had over 400,000 African Americans who served in that war effort. We attempted, some representatives of the Negro race, to attend that peace conference scheduled in Paris. But of course, we were denied by President Wilson the opportunity to attend. And we can go on with so many ways that every time we try to fight back, they put roadblocks in our way. I'm going to tell this last story as I wind up here and take any questions that you have. And I realize that I'm keeping your audience, but there's so much. It's so difficult to. I lived a good life. I died fairly young at 68, but it was a life of impact. We had Black people who were moving from the South to the North to Chicago because I had now gotten married and settled in Chicago. And my husband was fairly well-to-do. He was trained as a lawyer. And what I noticed was, again, the more well-to-do Black people doing everything they could to distance themselves from our brethren who didn't have the means.
Yeah.
And we had this area on South Street, a number of blocks of the street. We didn't walk down that street. We strutted down that street. It was the street where everybody came and you had to show yourself off in your best garbs. And there were certain storefronts, but once you got behind that, there were salons and gambling institutions and things of that nature. But what I recognized is that for the white people coming into the city, they had the YMCA and they had other places that would take them in and give them a helping hand to find work and then to be able to provide for themselves.
Yeah.
But none of those places would take in Blacks.
Mm.
Every other group, every other ethnic group could come and find shelter and assistance, but not Black people. And so, amongst the many initiatives that I founded, women's clubs and literacy societies and so on, I founded the Negro Fellowship League. And the purpose of this was to create a place where, as our brothers and sisters who were less fortunate migrated to Chicago, we had a place, and there were thousands of people that I helped to find jobs. And there were a few donations that would come in to help us cover the rent for the place and to provide resources. But it was me also paying out of the work that I was doing, and my husband also assisting with keeping this going. Well, as things got harder and so many of the Black elites who could have helped to keep the place open were still distancing themselves. My husband and I managed to keep it that the Negro Fellowship League open for 10 years, but we eventually had to shut our doors. And I share that story because I wonder if we have learned yet.
I don't think that's the case.
And we cannot ask for others to do for us what we are unwilling to do for ourselves.
Yeah.
And if you have been so blessed, remember again that most of our Black elites, most of our Black millionaires actually have made their money first from the Black community. First, we accept you, and then maybe you cross over. Aretha Franklin, who came much later than me, understood this, which is why she always paid reverence to the Black community. She did her best to support what was going on
Yeah.
in the Black community. It looks like too many of us have forgotten these lessons as we live our well-to-do lives.
Mm.
Oh, oh gosh, I keep remembering more and more stories. Go and research July 2nd, 1917, one of the deadliest race riots in the United States history in East St. Louis. And when people were running away from East St. Louis, I went to East St. Louis to get the stories, to document the stories from our people. Do you remember a story that took place in Arkansas? I promise this will probably be the last one I tell you. I had not been back to the South in decades because I was concerned for my well-being. However, there were these young men who had been corralled and charged with all manners of crimes that were going to cost them their lives in Arkansas. And I was a much older woman at the time. And I snuck in, well, under the guise of being one of the wives and mothers of the boys, the men who were being held there. And when they recognized me, I put my hand to my lips. Shh, don't let them know who it is that's visiting you. But I need to hear your stories. And I didn't bring anything to write with because that would give me away.
Yeah.
And they told their stories of how it was a matter of self-defense, and then the white mob came in and they just ransacked the town and gathered up these young men, and they were going to put these men to death. And at the end of it, about 2 hours they had talked to me. I said, sing me some songs. And they started to sing some spirituals. And they were singing about dying and going to heaven and how God was going to reward them in heaven. And when they were done, I said to them, why are you singing about dying and going to heaven? Why are you not singing to this same God and telling this God to free you from this? Why are you not singing about fighting back?
Hmm.
And I left that jail and I wrote their story. And that went out to across the country. And based on all of the attention that that story garnered, those young men were eventually acquitted. Years later, I saw a young man in Chicago. And he said, I've been looking for you since I moved here. And I said, he said, do you remember me? I said, I don't. And he said, I was one of the young men in that jail. And you told us not to pray for death, but to pray for life and to fight. And I just wanted to come and thank you. So to all of you listening to me today, how are you fighting? Till the end of my life, just a year before I died, I ran for political office. I did not make it, but I ran. In what way are you going to contribute to the liberation of our people? Have you not heard from multiple women so far that your silence will not save you? And so I want to thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank those who are still telling my story. I want to thank those who have found ways to get information out about who I am, who are, that now there's a stamp in my name, and look, lo and behold, I died way back in 1931, and in 2020, they'd give me a Pulitzer Prize. Well, go figure. Um, go figure. I guess we can still speak from the grave. Of course, my Chicago home is
Our museum.
a place of honor today. Yes, it's been designated a National Historic Landmark. There was once a housing development in Chicago named the I.W. Wells Homes. There are numerous schools and streets and scholarships in my name. And I'm very grateful, not because my name necessarily needs to go up, but the work that needs to be done still and how it was done is what needs to go forward. And so Paula Giddings has a rather thick book on me, Ida, A Sword Among Lions. And what I love is that there's so many books that have been written that can appeal to even younger people. This one,
A.W. Wells.
yes, Mother of the Civil Rights Movement. And I like this one. They have all kinds of titles for me. Ida B. the Queen, The Extraordinary Life and Legacy of Ida B. Wells. And it's interesting how some of them put B. Wells Barnett and some don't, but I'm very grateful to Ferdinand Barnett for being the kind of husband that he was to me and for the legacy that we have left with our children and our grandchildren. And I apologize for taking the liberties of an older woman to speak so long.
No, 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 no. I think, like you said, the stories need to be told. Parallels can be drawn with what you went through, experienced with our current predicament. You mentioned lynching. There is maybe there is still lynching in the South, but now the kind of lynching people are used to is economic lynching. 300,000 women were let go of the federal government, and that is a sizable part of the population. So that in itself is nurturing the black empowerment that
Well,
could be built upon.
yes, I'm glad you bring that up. That there are different forms of lynching, but I must say
Hmm.
there seems to be an uptick in the appearance of Black young men
Yeah, yeah,
found hanging.
and being
Now, if it's true
mhm,
that they truly took their own lives and chose that means, we must do an investigation into what is happening in our community that would push a young man to take his life in a way so reminiscent of what our oppressors did to us.
correct.
And these lynchings are showing up not just in the, well, let me rephrase, but these hangings, these strange fruit on trees,
Mm,
are showing up not just in the South, but also in some of the northern
cities.
areas as well.
Correct, correct, correct.
And we must not just believe the headlines, we must do our own research and understand, are our young men really harming themselves in this manner? Or is something else underfoot?
I
But
think
no
the
one else should be expected to tell our stories for us.
true, true. I
Yes.
mean, we also have loads of platforms now that longer the days that you have everything in print. Now you could do video investigation, video journalists are there, so you could, write and document the story. And then obviously people,
What I could have done if I lived in your times. What I could have done. Yes.
I mean, the tools are much more advanced now
Mhm.
to the point where you put a story online and it travels farther than even what you did back in the day. I mean, we're talking about.
Is that why you is that why we have given up our presses?
I think we're not giving up our
How
presses.
how is
It's
it possible that we had more newspapers in the late 1890s and early 1900s than you have today in 2026?
okay. So a host of reasons can be put down to that. One is the fact that the oligarchs have bought up all the presses in order to control the narrative.
I can't let you carry on down
N-
that path.
No, well, I mean,
Did we not have oligarchs back in our time?
no, you had robber barons back then, but here is the fact that you have, well, I suppose maybe I'm trying
Would it
to,
not be because we stopped patronizing our own papers?
that would be the case. That would be the case.
So this
And
is a self-inflicted wound?
well, and also the fact that we don't, the way we normally would support presses now is we just sort of show up instead of paying into it, helping to nurture it, sharing, you know, and basically just constantly subscribing as well.
I
Would
hear excuses. I did not suffer excuses.
no, I'm not saying obviously those kind of things cannot be done now. They can be, but we also need to adapt with the times. There are platforms that can be launched, one of which is what we're doing here, which is storytelling. That is a form of memory keeping, record keeping as well. But it's just that we're not, for want of a better word, we're not motivated enough. That will be the case.
So here's an easy enough assignment for whoever might be watching or listening. Find
Mm,
find a journalist or a platform, whatever words you'll call it now, that you are going to support, and do so on a consistent basis so that they can do the work
mm,
of getting the stories and putting out the stories. Someone has to go to where things are happening. Someone has to speak to the people. Someone has to make the sacrifices. And all of these things take resources.
true, true.
So if each person decided, I'm going to identify one news outlet that serves my community, or one reporter who serves my community. And if you want to send them a specific note and say, I am giving you my $5
Mm,
because this is what I expect, so that they understand, we could put ourselves back in a position where it doesn't matter what their papers say.
yeah,
We are telling our own stories and informing our people so that they can make informed decisions, whether
mm,
it's even on voting. If our people are dependent on this media that has been bought to find out about what candidates they should support, you can understand how we might keep losing out on people who could actually serve us.
true, true, true.
I have the utmost confidence in us. I know where we've come from. We must remember and understand also the progress, but also understand what it took to make that progress.
Mm,
And to be very clear that no manner of decorum is going to grant you white citizenship in America.
certainly not.
Therefore, we must fight for our own rights. And just like I said over a century ago, that too many of us were not fighting hard enough, the same is true today.
Yes. Fortunately, that's the case. And we have the red tyrant at the moment. So that's it. We've come to the end of this week's episode of Women in Resistance. Next week, it will be the turn of Ndate Yala Mboj, who she is, what she was about. You will hear in the course of next week's episode. Or before then, on Saturday, myself, Ayafabera Nelly Esquire, Marlon, uh, Sandra, and Dr. Travis would be talking about Carnegie Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro. That is part of the Grill and Book podcast. So Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, it will be the turn of Carnegie Woodson, the father of Black history. I mean, let's save it till Saturday. Until then, Ms. Wells, thank you for coming. And from me, until next week, it's good night and God bless.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.